What's up, good people? I'm just Major. We're here to talk about it. The U.S. banking system. Is there a problem? I know there has been a problem, but do we need to look at other countries and how they run their systems and maybe come up with a better solution or something? Let's check it out.
America's banking industry is shrinking.
Community banks are struggling. We had about 7,000 community banks right after the crisis. Now we've got about
So, wow, 2005, man, it looks like close to 9,000 banks. Gracious. That's a lot. 7,000, 2010, 2015, 6,000, 2020, maybe 5,000. Man, they're shrinking every year. I can't remember the year we had the banking crisis. I think the US government bailed out, a lot of banks or a few major banks, but yeah, that's that's a lot, nearly cut in half.
4,000. That's a huge decline.
We see that those local banks are really disappearing. It's really hard for them to compete with the very largest banks who are essentially subsidized by the public because they are seen as too big to fail.
The four largest banks in the U.S., JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Citigroup, hold an increasingly large percentage of the banking industry's assets.
20 trillion. Top four from organic growth, top four from mergers and acquisitions. Okay, so they're buying smaller banks as well, it looks like. All other organizations, about 10 trillion, just over 10 trillion. Top four from mergers and okay.
General phenomenon that it's easier for the regulators to let a small bank fail than a big one itself gives banks an incentive to consolidate.
The U.S. has nearly 4,500 banks.
That's a big number compared to other countries that are similar to us in terms of economic development, even when you control for population.
For example, in Canada, there are a mere 79 banks. In the midst of the 2008 financial crisis, the World Economic
Wow. 79 banks in Canada, all of Canada? Man, that's crazy. The 4,500. So is the real question, why do we have so many in the US, or why do they have so few in Canada? Wow.
Forum named the Canadian banking system the soundest in the world.
There's never been a banking crisis in Canada. Good for them. Hats off. I think they do a lot of things that are right. I think their regulatory culture is good there.
A concentrated banking system like Canada's may provide more stability, but it could also limit competition and innovation.
If you're a small business in Canada, it's harder to get the kind of lending at scale when you're smaller than it is in the United States. And that potentially means less employment, less innovation, less.
It's hard as crap to get funding for a small business here in America. Man, you almost have to have a perfect credit score and almost 30% of, well, especially if you're buying a business, perfect credit score nearly, and almost 30% of the asking price. And we're not even talking about the business owners that don't want to do funding on their own and they're trying to sell their businesses. So, yeah, but you can get a car loan, you can get a mortgage loan, but a business loan, man.
Activity, less GDP growth.
So, would the U.S. benefit from a consolidated banking system like Canada's?
Canada's banking system is one of the most concentrated banking systems in the G7 countries.
The banks known as the Big Six hold 93% of Canada's deposits.
I think some people certainly would refer to it as an oligopoly.
Larger banks are less likely to fail than small ones because they have a more diversified depositor base.
Because we have always had more conservative lending standards and a sort of a safer system there, In 2008, we had no subprime mortgage crisis, no foreclosure crisis, no housing market collapse, people's retirement savings.
What? No housing market collapse, no banking crisis, no foreclosure crisis, and this is all of Canada? Man, wow, what are they doing?
Things were preserved.
The risk taking with the Canadian banks is less than it is in the US. The US, we have a little different approach. We like to encourage innovation.
Canadian banks may be more conservative in part because of regulation.
We do have one federal regulator. It's the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. It runs federally across the country, and it does collectively what sort of 3 different regulators at the federal level would do in the United States.
Among other duties, the OCC, the Federal Reserve System, and the FDIC together regulate banking. The OCC focuses on national banks, federal savings associations, and federal parts of foreign banks. The Federal Reserve System supervises state-chartered banks within its system, savings and loan holding companies, foreign banks operating in the U.S., bank holding companies, and more. The FDIC is the primary federal regulator of state-chartered banks that choose not to join the Federal Reserve System and is the backup supervisor for the remaining insured banks and savings associations.
That's a lot. That already looks like a lot. OCC, the Fed, and the FDIC all got their hands in on the pot. There's a lot of people who want to control, I'm sure. And there's no telling how many employees are working in these different organizations. That already sounds like and looks like a lot.
This kind of regulatory complexity maybe leaves room for some innovation, right? So that if you have a great idea for a new way of doing banking and you can't make it work under the federal OCC chartering system, maybe you start as a state bank and it allows you on a smaller scale to innovate and to create something new, which then you could scale up if you wanted to. On the downside, of course, there are potentially gaps in coverage for people.
There have been 570 bank failures in the U.S. since 2001, including one as recently as June of 2025. Over the same period, Canada has had none. In March of 2023, Silicon Valley Bank experienced the 3rd largest bank failure in U.S. history.
Stocks down and fear up about the fallout from the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank.
When depositors at Silicon Valley Bank got nervous, you know where they headed? They went to the nation's largest banks. And even though their deposits would still be uninsured, they knew that they would always be protected because those banks were too big to fail.
I don't know about too big to fail because a number of them did. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, a number of them had to get bailed out. But we're going to stop the video right there, man. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like, comment, share, subscribe. I appreciate you guys watching and commenting for those who have. And we're going to leave it right there. 3 million subscribers. Loaded.